Okay, well, that's lost for posterity. But it's now my pleasure to welcome and introduce our two speakers, Professor Cameron Carter and Professor Lee Tian, co-directors of the UC Davis Cannabis and Hemp Research Center. The center's mission is to facilitate much needed cannabis and hemp research despite regulatory challenges. The center provides discovery through cutting edge cannabis and hemp research across multiple disciplines to advance knowledge about production, environmental and health impacts, testing, and applications for use and public policy. So firstly, Cam is the founding director of the UC Davis Imaging Research Center. He's held endowed professorship in schizophrenia research and has served as director of the Schizophrenia Research and Education Program since 2006. Amongst his many other accomplishments and accolades is that he was a former acting vice chancellor for research, which made him my boss for a while. But even more importantly, and unbeknownst to most people, and unbeknownst to both of us initially, was that we both grew up 6 miles from each other in Perth, Australia. Lee is an associate professor in the Department of Plant Sciences, affiliated with the UC Davis Food for Health Initiative and the UC Davis Comprehensive Cancer Center. Her research focuses on how phytonutrients, which are chemicals with benefits for human health, are made and controlled in plants. So with that introduction, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Tian, and she will start off today's seminar. So how do we do that? Oh, it's done.
All right. Thanks, Jeff, for the introduction. And we also want to thank the Tahoe Environmental Research Center for this opportunity to give an overview of research on cannabis and hemp at UC Davis, as well as activities organized by the UC Davis Cannabis and Hemp Research Center. As a leader in agriculture and veterinary medicine with a top-ranked medical center and law school, UC Davis has an extensive research infrastructure in place that is pioneering advancements in the knowledge of production, environmental and health impacts, testing and applications, as well as providing insights for social implications and public policy on cannabis and hemp. The mission of our center is fivefold. We want to stimulate the development of leading-edge disciplinary and interdisciplinary research, to promote interdisciplinary research and partnerships, to serve as a portal for external stakeholders and potential research partners, to support educational and outreach activities, and to provide guidance and the necessary resources to ensure that the funding and the conduct of cannabis research complies with all regulatory requirements. Here are the core objectives of the UC Davis Cannabis and Hemp Research Center. The center is co-directed by a distinguished Professor Cameron Carter and myself. As Jeff mentioned, I'm an associate professor in the Plant Sciences Department at UC Davis. Our center launched about 1 year ago, so we're still pretty young. So to briefly summarize some of the Cannabis and Hemp Research Center activities, we have sponsored the research investments in cannabis and hemp, or REACH internal grant competition. So the primary goal of the REACH internal funding competition was to propel promising advancements in cannabis and hemp at UC Davis, to gain new levels of support from federal, state, and industry to deliver significant impact to our community. Successful applications were those with the greatest potential for future discovery and innovation, judged by their scientific merit, potential impact on society, and sustainability. We were very pleased to find some really strong proposals in round 1, and the round 2 competition is scheduled to launch in spring 2021. We're very happy to see that our support is paving the way for external grant applications by UC Davis researchers, such as the Bureau of Cannabis Control, or BCC funding, that was released in September 2020. UC Davis researchers submitted a total of 19 proposals in response to the BCC funding call that encompass studies on environmental impacts, plant breeding, public health, health policies, economics, and community development. This wide range of topics further demonstrate the research strengths on cannabis and hemp at UC Davis. The Cannabis and Hemp Research Center helped provide boilerplate language for the BCC proposals. I will show you the list of funded, reach, and BCC projects in the next couple of slides. To show you here. So the Cannabis and Hemp Research Center has also launched a monthly research forum series on cannabis and hemp since September 2020. The purpose of this monthly forum series is to inform our campus community, members of the cannabis and hemp industry, and also the general public on cannabis and hemp research being done at UC Davis, and also to provide an opportunity for guest external researchers to share their expertise. Recordings of past presentations and the schedule of future forums can be found on our center website at cannabis.ucdavis.edu/forums. I'm also happy to report that UC Davis will be leading the next UC system-wide conference on cannabis in spring 2021. The date is due to be determined, so stay tuned for this exciting event. In addition to the co-directors, our center has in place an internal steering committee that helps determine and prioritize strategic goals to grow the cannabis and hemp enterprise at UC Davis, and an external advisory committee to help make sure that we not only best serve the needs of UC Davis researchers, but also the broader community. Professor Carter and I have been meeting with the steering committee and also be meeting with the advisory boards to develop a strategic plan for our center. So here are the projects that were funded by the Round 1 REACH internal grant applications. So they range from breeding for flowering phenology in hemp. So this is done by Professor Charlie Brummer in the Plant Sciences Department, and also he's the director of the Center for Plant Breeding. And so we also have the research on, we also have a research on development of synthetic H2 CBD, so done by Professor Mark Amaskal in the Department of Chemistry. So to have this H2 CBD as a safer and more effective form of CBD for use in clinical applications. So, and then extension specialist Keith Taylor in the community development department, he is working on market incentives and regulatory compliance in the Mendocino County. So there are also 2 additional studies trying to understand the human health impacts of cannabis use. Professor Cameron Carter and his colleague are among the UC Davis researchers who received the BCC grants in fall 2020. They aim to understand the impact of cannabis use in early psychosis. So, Professor Dan Sumner received support to assess the economic and environmental impacts of cannabis legalization. And with the BCC funding, Professor Mark Schenker will explore occupational health and industry hazards of California cannabis workers. As mentioned earlier, we have an exciting lineup of research forums presentations. So again, recordings of previous presentations and also the list of future presentations starting January 2021 can be found on our center website at cannabis.ucdavis.edu. I want to highlight that our actually next presentation is 1 week from today. It's from 11 a.m. to noon. Professor Dan Putnam and Professor Bob Hartmacher will talk about their findings from field trials of hemp varieties, focusing on water use, density, and pests in California. In the next few slides, Professor Carter and I would like to highlight research strengths in different disciplines at UC Davis. To start with plant sciences, our colleagues in plant sciences carry out research at levels of a single cell all the way to the entire ecosystem. Through studying the genotypes and phenotypes of plants, we have tools to pre-breed and breed desirable chemical profiles that are useful for pharmaceutical and other industries. There are also experts researching on water use, integrated pest management, and greenhouse gas emission to address environmental impacts of cannabis and hemp production. UC Davis has the top agriculture program in the nation. In addition to the hemp field trials and breeding studies I have already mentioned, there's also preliminary research looking into potential cannabis slash hemp. So these are essentially the same plant species, but they're differentiated by the content of a THC. So this study is really trying to look into the potential of their production, how they may affect wine grapes. So in another project, an energy efficient dehumidifier is tested for use in indoor farms. Okay, so now I'm going to turn it over to Professor Cameron Carter to showcase research in medicine and veterinary medicine at UC Davis.
Thank you, Lee. As the audience will know, UC Davis has a nationally recognized School of Medicine for both clinical care and for research. And we also have the #1 ranked School of College of Veterinary Medicine in the world. There's a great deal of interest in health-related research associated with cannabis. There's wide interest in the potential therapeutic effects of cannabis and cannabinoids. One of the challenges in the area of medical cannabis use, and this applies as much to human use as to veterinary use, is that much of the evidence to date about potential therapeutic effects of cannabis is largely anecdotal. There's a dearth of the kinds of controlled clinical trials that one would usually consider as evidence for the approval of a particular treatment for a particular disorder. And one of the opportunities that UC Davis provides, I think, for those in industry and those who are interested in potential medical benefits of medical cannabis is the ability to conduct those studies and to establish an evidence base for the use of medical cannabis in appropriate settings and situations. In addition to the medical use of cannabis, cannabinoids are a vast family of drugs that have widespread effects, both in the body and in the brain. And there is great potential in doing medicinal chemistry and other types of studies to isolate specific cannabinoids, understand their mechanisms of actions, and develop them as potential remedies for problems in human health. And so across the School of Medicine, as well as the veterinary school, there are actually a fairly wide range of projects that are seek to address this. So Lee already referred to one of our rich grants, and the presentation by Dr. Rogowski and his team that will happen in the spring related to the synthesis of CBD analogs. CBD is approved for the treatment of certain forms of treatment-resistant epilepsy. And there are challenges associated with current forms of CBD in terms of tolerance and pharmacokinetics. And the group at UC Davis in the Rogowski lab and the epilepsy group are working in preclinical models to develop new forms of CBD that might have better bioavailability and be more effective in these specific forms of epilepsy, as well as in other kinds of seizure disorders. And we were excited to support their research with a small seed grant this year. There's a great deal of interest in the role of cannabis in pain management. Many people would probably be aware that the epidemiology suggests that states that have medical cannabis or legal recreational cannabis have seen a reduction in overdoses associated with opioid use. And it's hypothesized that cannabis use can reduce reliance on opioids in people with chronic pain. There's a great deal of interest in our pain medicine group in the medical school, as well as in groups in the cancer center in looking more closely at this. And we will have a presentation from the director of the UCLA Center, who's an expert on the interactions between the opioid system and the cannabinoid system, and has conducted rigorous studies of the interaction between cannabis and THC in particular and opioids in the perception and experience of human pain. So we'll be excited to present some more in-depth exploration of that in one of our upcoming colloquia. The third area in the health sciences that we are interested in is the impact, potentially therapeutic, potentially non-therapeutic, of cannabis use in high-risk populations. And these include pregnant women where exposure in utero to cannabinoids appears to have negative effects on development in the offspring and increased prevalence of autism and other developmental and mental disorders. And in high-risk populations such as adolescents who are in the midst of rapid brain development and organization, and particularly adolescents who are already having mental health problems. So these areas of understanding the effects of cannabis in high-risk youth and other high-risk populations are also a focus of investigators, including my own. And we successfully secured a grant from the state to use brain imaging and other methods to understand the impact of cannabis use in high-risk individuals. And we'll be beginning that project very soon. I'll have the next slide, Lee.
Okay, no, just a sec.
Great, thanks. So in the School of Medicine, in the Veterinary School, there are also some very interesting projects going on. One from Karen Bales, who is actually in the psychology department, is studying the role of endocannabinoids. Those are the endogenous cannabinoids that play a very important signaling role in all cells in our body, but particularly interestingly, for those that are interested in behavior in the brain, and the social behaviors and the social affiliation. And this particular work actually uses a very interesting animal model, which is the prairie vole. There's also an environmental science project underway there where the impact of cannabis grows, and particularly those that are unregulated, may have on certain endangered species here in California. So just to wrap up, there are, I think, many areas of interest related to human health and animal health, where research into cannabinoids and into cannabis use can present new opportunities for therapeutics, as well as a better understanding about some of the potential negative effects that cannabis use may have in at-risk populations. And we've already begun to see a fair bit of success in terms of both internal and external funding in developing those lines of research here at UC Davis. I'm going to turn it back to Lee.
Okay. So in addition to our strengths in agriculture and environmental sciences, animal and human health, UC Davis also has many research strengths in law and public policy. So here's an example of published work on medical cannabis dispensaries responses to recreational use legalization in Colorado and Washington. So there are actually quite a few reports already published by UC Davis researchers due to space limitation. We're only giving some of the examples. And there's also an NIH-funded project on health and social consequences of marijuana legalization. To give some examples of the public policy research. So here are some of the sample studies. And UC Davis has research centers. So one is the UC Davis Center for Public Policy Research, and also the other one is the Center for Healthcare Policy and Research, which was established in 1994. So this center, colleagues in these centers conduct research to bring science to policy and to develop science-based policy. So this was actually alluded to by Professor Cameron Carter earlier. This is what we really need. We need to have science to back up the policy. Okay. So now to switch the gear a little bit, we want to talk about some of the legal limitations to cannabis research. So although medical and recreational use of cannabis is legal in California, cannabis and THC are still classified as Schedule I controlled substances by the federal law. So University of California research involving possession, use, distribution, or cultivation of cannabis must comply with all applicable university, local, state, and federal regulations. This policy applies to any research conducted in the United States, regardless of whether or not the research is conducted on a UC campus or a UC property. To continue, okay, but however, so researchers can perform studies that do not involve the direct use, possession, distribution, or cultivation of cannabis. For example, studies that survey individuals who use cannabis or analyze public records are allowed. Other than that, this type of indirect involvement of cannabis research, researchers will need to obtain a DEA Schedule I license and also must obtain the plant material from National Institute on Drug Abuse, or NIDA. And the plant material needs to be cultivated by University of Mississippi. Through a recent agreement between UC Davis and biopharmaceutical research company, UC Davis researchers can analyze plant materials. This includes any parts of plants, seeds, or extract at BRC because they do have a DEA analytical registration. So how about research on the non-psychoactive phytocannabinoid cannabidiol, or CBD? So the recent the DEA interim final rule, so that was published in August 2020. So this interim final rule allows for research without a Schedule I license if the end product of the plant being researched on has less than 0.3% THC. So this regulation allows for CBD and other research, even if the researcher does not know the original plant source. So either it's a hemp plants, which has lower than 0.3% THC on a dry weight basis, or cannabis, which has a THC content that is greater than 0.3% based on dry weight basis. Okay, so, but however, researchers still need to contact the campus biosafety officer before conducting the research project. So the regulation for hemp research changed in 2018. According to the Farm Bill of December 2018, hemp plants, and these are also referred to as industrial hemp, are legal and can be used for research as long as the delta-9 THC concentration does not go over 0.3% by dry weight. But however, human and animal research on hemp still need to meet FDA requirements. In terms of funding support for cannabis research, the UC researchers cannot accept a grant or a gift that comes from individuals or entities, such as companies or associations, whose funding is known to be directly derived from cannabis activities that are not permitted by the federal law. So for example, from the sale of cannabis by growers legally licensed in the state of California. However, the funding support may be considered if the individual or entity obtains some revenue from cannabis, but also has separately identifiable revenue not tied to cannabis. In addition, UC researchers may accept funding support that is not directly tied to cannabis. For hemp research, funding support not directly tied to cannabis industry can be accepted. Okay. To wrap up the presentation, we're very interested in working with industry and public partners to support basic and application-driven research from discovery through development and production. To provide a venue for such collaborative activities, the Cannabis and Hemp Research Center launched the Corporate Affiliates Partnership Program, or CAP, in April 2020, which includes several mechanisms. For more details of the CAP program, please visit our center website, again at cannabis.ucdavis.edu. We can also be reached at this email address at chrc@ucdavis.edu. I think that's all we have for the presentation. Thank you so much for joining us today. And Professor Carter and I are happy to answer any questions that you may have. I think there are at least a couple Q&As. Yeah. So, I can start.
Yeah, well, if you can see the questions, then why don't you or Cam directly respond to them, or read them out and respond to them.
Well, I think for the first one from Jennifer McAuliffe, do you know why the plant product used in your research must be grown in Mississippi? That's historical. In terms of, the regulation of cannabis is complicated under federal law. Both the FDA and the Department of Justice play a role. Historically, there's only been one supplier, a legal supplier of cannabis for research, and that's been a center that's been at the University of Mississippi, I think, going back to the 1960s, and up until recently, they have been denoted to be the only legal suppliers. During the past, I think around about the time of the transition to the last presidency, there was a lot of movement to open things up, and I believe there was legislation to allow for I believe it's the FDA to or maybe it's the Department of Justice. I think it's the Department of Justice to approve other sites, other growing sites. And UC Davis and other centers actually submitted proposals to do that, requests for licensure to grow cannabis. And in every case, that's sat on a desk somewhere in Washington for the past 4 years. But speaking to the next question, there is reason to believe that that will change.
Yeah, so I think Cam, in a way, also answered the second question, right? So the change, I think it will be useful to be able to cultivate cannabis, like different, we call it chemovars, like based on the chemical profiles for medical research, because so far, this only, the strain that is being produced at University of Mississippi, according to medical researchers, are really not really resemble the chemical profiles of what really, like, the community being exposed to. So it's really I think we can contribute to the really medical research by providing the materials that actually can resemble what's actually the users have. I think that's kind of so to just follow up on the second questions, right? So what difference would that make in your research? So I think the researchers can actually have the materials that are really more appropriate for to address some of the research objectives. There's a.
So I would add to that. So the real knock on the University of Mississippi product has been that it has been low THC cannabis, with THC levels of 6-7%, which was what people grew and distributed and used maybe 20 years ago. As you know, the THC concentration has probably increased 2 or 3 times over that now. And so the concern about that for research is that any research that's done using this product is not really reflecting what people are actually doing in the community. And of course, if we were interested in different compositions of cannabinoids for biomedical application or medical marijuana use, you'd want to be able to order up, various combinations of different cannabinoids. That's the sort of thing that a specialized center like Davis would be very good at. It would be a natural sort of thing for us to do. But right now, that's not really possible through the University of Mississippi. So that's been a real limitation, but as Lee suggested, it's likely to change.
So I'm reading out another question we have that either of you should feel free to answer. Can you share any results of the research so far on the therapeutic uses of cannabis? How effective is it? Do you have any specific examples?
Yes, well, I mean, I would comment on that and say that the evidence, so the National Academy of Medicine commissioned a report on the state of medical cannabis, and that was published, I think, about 3 years ago. And their conclusion was that the evidence is for efficacy in specific disorders is very limited. And so again, much of the evidence is more anecdotal. And so there's really a need for controlled clinical trials. I think there are certain areas such as appetite and weight loss and nausea in oncology patients where I think there's a body of evidence that supports efficacy. But a lot of the other things that people would often promote cannabis use for aren't well supported by evidence, and in fact often have mixed evidence. So, a good example would be anxiety and depression, where it's often, believed and advocated that cannabis can be helpful for anxiety and depression, but there's actually a good deal of evidence to suggest that, at least for some individuals, it makes anxiety and depression worse. So this is an area where we just really need research to guide us.
So there's a question from Jennifer. Are you accepting resumes for researchers here on your project. So there are different ways of reaching us. So, you can reach us at chrc@ucdavis.edu. But if you're interested in particular research, we also have profiles of researchers on campus who work on cannabis and hemp on our website. So again, go to cannabis.ucdavis.edu and go through the research profiles. And also visit often because we're populating the website as well. So the new research profiles are being added to the website.
Okay, so I guess I wanted to thank Lee and to thank Cam for the presentation today. Maybe following up on that last question, and maybe something Cam said about trials needed. I am sure if you want volunteers amongst our audience here and amongst our contacts in the Tahoe Basin, we'll probably have some people who would gladly step up for trials as long as they were guaranteed not to get placebos. So with that, thank you all for joining. Thank you, Cam and Lee, for the presentation. I look forward to seeing you all at our next seminar next month.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.